Welcome to the Paternal Conversation Series. My name is Simon von Solden and I'm the CEO of Mail and your host for the series. Now, you're about to see a poll pop up on your screen. It's two really simple questions and you should actually be finished by the time that I finish this sentence, if I speak slow enough and let you go. The Voice of Fathers is our second webinar in the 5-part series. The series is recorded for those joining us today. You'll get an email advising you as to when it's available on the Plus Paternal webpage, which is within the Healthy Male website. And it'll also be going onto the Healthy Male YouTube channel. So please feel free to share it with other people and groups that you're connected to, all the socials, however you like to do it. But before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters. So thank you to everyone for making the commitment to attend this session when I know that probably the last thing you feel like doing is another Zoom meeting. But this one's going to be worth it. So, of course, a big shout out to all the parents out there who have been doing it particularly tough, and especially those still doing homeschooling. So today's going to be a great conversation. There's plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions of the panel. Now, to do this, all you got to do is use the chat function in Zoom. Now, I know that during coronavirus, you've all become IT specialists, but unless you've changed your Zoom settings, the chat function usually sits at the bottom of your screen. So your questions are only going to be visible to the panel. So don't worry about anyone else seeing them. It's really just us and the panel. And we really, it's the only way that we can hear what you're saying, because we can't hear anything that you're going to be saying, but we hear it through your keyboards. So over the next 45 minutes, feel free to hit us up with all of your questions. There's going to be a short survey at the end of the webinar. It's not just the usual feedback, it's your opportunity to tell us what you think is a priority for change. We'd love to hear from you. So I encourage you to have a look at the rest of our webinars and register for them. The link to the registration will be provided in a follow-up email and probably in the chat as well. Now, you're not here to hear me rabbit on with housekeeping though. So we have 3 fabulous guests for you today. Adam Tardif, Adam is the Victorian State Manager for Dad's Group. He's been a father for a couple of years to young William, and a husband for 7 years to Katie. His passion lies with helping people get the absolute best out of themselves, whether it's fathers through his role with Dad's Group, young men and women through being a football coach, or with his friends and family. He's an avid sports fan, loves to travel and spends time with his family. He's probably managed about 1.5 of those in the last 7 months, I'd say, but anyway. Stathy Paxanos is also here with us today, and Stathy reckons he's heard about every joke there is about blokes' one job in the IVF process. Don't know what's just happened there. I think I've just lost you on that screen, so we'll get rid of that. Right, so now, Stathy wrote an article, actually it was published on the ABC News earlier this year, about his IVF experience and the 13 unsuccessful cycles he had over a 7-year period. Stathy's a former sports journo who now works in research as an assistant and science communicator at the Monash Sustainable Development Institute. And finally, but not finally, Dr. Jackie Mcdonald. Jackie is the Senior Research Fellow who heads Deakin University's Men and Parenting Pathways Research Program. She's convener of the Australian Fatherhood Research Consortium, which was established in 2017 to advance the science of fatherhood and inform practice and policy that supports men and their families. thank each and every one of you for joining us today. And also a quick thank you to the Australian Department of Health for their continued support of Healthy Male and their support of the Plus Paternal Project. So here we all are. So I may as well kick straight into it and get going. So Stathy and Adam, as fathers, you would have had as a father and as someone trying to become a father, you would have had very, very different experiences. So I might start with you, Stathy, and what were your experiences with the health system? What was it like going through 13 cycles of IVF?
Thank you, Simon. Hello, everyone. It wasn't an easy experience. I mean, anyone who has had experience with IVF knows that it's a roller coaster in many ways, and your expectations continually going up and down. For myself and my wife Jo, we had 13 cycles. Unfortunately, we did not even get a pregnancy during the IVF process. Every round it was you go in with hope and expectation that this might be the cycle, this might be the one that you might get a pregnancy and hopefully get have a child as an end process to that. And then within a few days for us after the implantation, there'll be the failure, and of course, you get branded with the label repeated implantation failure, which was what was happening to us. So mentally, it's very tough. Emotionally, it's very tough, especially when you're trying to support your partner, but also trying to keep your own expectations in check and your hopes up. And there is that feeling that, where do you actually fit into the process, and if there's enough support for you, and whether enough acknowledgement of your place in the process.
Look, there's a lot in what you just said then, Stathy, but we might just flick across to Adam. And so, Adam, your experiences would have been quite different, I'm gathering.
Yeah, my experiences were different. I suppose at the time you're quite ignorant though when you're in the process. So whilst you're going to the hospitals, I went to every appointment that my wife would have with the midwife. It's just something that I wanted to do, and to me it was something that was normal. But at the time I didn't really know much different, and then leading into when we were in the birthing suite and after we had the baby, you don't really know what kind of care you're supposed to get or what kind of support you're supposed to get. I think whilst you're in it, you think this is it. It wasn't until afterwards where I realised all of the gaps that could have been much more helpful for us especially in the first 6 months of William's life. I just found that there were so many things that, even though not everybody has exact same experiences, there are so many things that are bound to happen or that are really common to happen, and helping with a bit more preparation with that would have been a lot more helpful. That being said, the hospital we had William at, the Royal Women's, was, they were absolutely amazing in terms of their care for Katie and for William and for us. They were really accommodating. It's the other stuff that's outside of that can help prepare us in the early stages for when we get home.
Yep. Yeah. And I remember reading with the surveys we did, one of the men wrote in saying his issue was he didn't know what he didn't know. And so he went through this whole process thinking, that must be what it is. That's what you get. And came out and talked to a number of other blokes and then went, oh, hang on. Actually, that wasn't what I should have got. But Jackie, how does that resonate with you in terms of the studies that you've done, the research that you've done, in terms of men and their experiences through that process?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I think that really rings very true, the comments that both Adam and Stathy have made. And I think what it is that our health system reflects pretty much our cultural understanding of family and fatherhood, and we think of it potentially hierarchically, with mother at the top of that hierarchical tree caring for an infant. And what's not happening here is thinking of family as a system, and where every single part of that system needs to work appropriately for everyone to function and thrive as much as they possibly can under those circumstances. So I guess there's a sense that maybe there's this trickle-down effect. We'll look after the mother and we'll care for the infant, and the father, well, the father is often, and both, I think Adam has mentioned this in the past, that it steps in and pegged as a support person in that. So rather than a central part of that family. So we think of father, and I think the quote that you had up at the beginning is of the father talking about potentially being thought of as a voluntary person in this process. You can or you can't engage if you want.
Yeah.
But really, I think what hopefully will happen is this whole case for change that Plus Paternal is focused on and bringing to the fore is about saying, actually, the father plays a central role here. Just understanding that throughout our system, it's a cultural and system change at the same time that needs to occur.
Yeah. So, Stathy, you mentioned, actually, when you were talking, you said a line which I've heard before, actually, from someone else who's sitting on this panel, but you said, who supported you? So who did support you? Where did you go for support? I mean, 13 IVF cycles, and then you weren't actually successful, were you, during any of the IVF cycles? So did you go and get support? What did you do?
No, at the time I didn't, and I think that my story is quite similar to what Adam was saying, in that when I was actually in the process, I was sort of a bit numb about the whole thing. I sort of had the attitude is that we would love to be parents, and I really desperately wanted to be a father, but I sort of took the attitude, well, if it didn't happen, well, then there'll be more time to go travel and that sort of thing. So I was always sort of hedging my bets, and that might have been my coping mechanism to overcome the disappointment of each cycle. As well, if it doesn't eventuate, well, we've got something else as an alternative to look forward to. And it was only a few years later, after our final IVF cycle, when Jo actually did become pregnant, we went and got the scan at 6 weeks, and we could see the heartbeats of two little embryos there, twins. But unfortunately, a few weeks later, Jo miscarried, and that was the first time she had become pregnant at all, and that was completely unexpected, wasn't planned, complete surprise. And it was only at that stage that it sort of hit me, that when I got to a stage where it was so close to being real, that it hit me what I'd been through, and what we had both been through. And it was only at that stage that I thought, I needed more support than what I realised I had and what I had sought, because I really didn't speak to anyone about it. I didn't speak to my mates about it that much. Apart from, as we mentioned before, the humour about man's job in the process. But yeah, so I sort of went through the process, just dedicating myself to try and give support to Jo, and that was about it in terms of thinking about what was happening. Yeah.
And I do have to thank you, Stathy, for not only for writing an article on the Age, but for actually coming along today and actually talking about it, because there's so many fellows out there that will be able to actually see in what you're saying something that's occurred to them, or and actually know that it's that feeling of not being alone, I think, is actually really important. Yeah,
definitely.
But Adam, it was your words that I stole then, in terms of who supported you. So and it was something that you said that it did resonate with me when you said it, which was, you agreed that the role of the mother and the child is the focus, and rightly so. And to support them is something that you had no issue in doing, but then who was there to support you? With the power of hindsight, what could you have done different? Like where was that support? Was it around?
Yeah, it was around. Thankfully, we've got great family that's been really supportive, and particularly Katie's mum and dad, who are in North Queensland, were here for a few weeks. So that was helpful, especially at the start. Obviously, a couple of people that have been there and done it before. But I think what would have been helpful, and there's something that Jackie said before that made me think of, that how we support the mother and the infant, which again, yeah, we very much need that. In fact, sometimes I wonder whether we could be doing more. But then there's this guest that the dad may or may not step up. We know what we do to support the mum, we know what we do to support the infant, and dad, well, all the best. It's kind of strange, but which is interesting because there's so many variables as to what could make a dad, even just an average dad, let alone an amazing dad. We've got our upbringing and a whole range of different things that could shape what kind of father we become, and whether we are. How do they know? What kind of tools have they used, or how do they know that I'm actually, going to go home and we're going home to a relatively well-equipped, safe household? Does that make sense? I just find that kind of interesting that there's no real. Well, I didn't go through any kind of, and it's not to scrutinise or to interview people and make sure, nothing like that. But surely there's a way to kind of get a bit of a gauge as to your readiness for when you go home or when you're becoming a father in the antenatal period.
Yeah, you're right. There is no roadmap, is there? And so therefore, we've got to be better at teaching one another, I suppose, and learning from one another as men and fathers that, there are places you'll trip up and fall, and that's okay. But so, Jackie, are you finding with the research, is there much focus on the journey of the fathers?
Yes, and I think that, these conversations are becoming more and more common, where people are speaking more. And we talk a little bit about support, but support comes in lots of different forms. So there's informational support, there's emotional support, and they might come from different people. So the health practitioners that you speak to might be wanting to talk about your health system, about your family's health, about your mental health. But they also play a role potentially in connecting you to other people who might play other support roles. And what we find in the research is, and the research, when we ask men about who their main supports in their lives are prior to becoming fathers, that person is their partner. It's, you turn to your partner, and yet at that moment, your partner is so heavily focused on the new child, on their new role, on their sleep, on their feeding, and there's so many things happening that at that point, suddenly there's this void for who you find your support from as a father. Opportunities like Dad's Group Inc., Adam, the work that you're doing there, if we could get into the system knowledge of opportunities like that for fathers to connect, because Simon, you mentioned before that not wanting to be alone, but also wanting to know that whatever it is you're going through is normal. So when we talk to fathers, what we hear is, oh, so pleased to hear somebody else went through that. Or, this is what I'm feeling, or this is what's happened in my house. Has that happened to anybody else? Is this right? Is this normal? Is it just me? Those are the kind of questions that dads are wanting to talk to each other about. But they can also hear it from professionals. But one of the things that we've heard from a study we recently did with some midwives is one of their concerns is that we said, if you had an inkling that a father needed mental health support, what would you do? And a very large proportion didn't know. They had not been skilled up on what the next step was in terms of the referral process. where would they send that father for the support that he needed?
That's really interesting, Jackie. And it takes me back to a survey we did actually a couple of years ago, asking GPs about young men, going in and asking them about fertility, and the GPs, the resounding result was, in fact, they didn't feel comfortable talking about it. So there seems to be a gap right across the whole, like right from preconception, right through the whole pregnancy phase, even into the early years. For men, there's this sort of void of like, so where do I go? Who do I talk to? So on that, and something you said, Jackie, was, do we look at the health system meeting men halfway? Is it the health system that changes? Is it men that change? Is it attitudes? Is it expectations? I mean, Stathy, you walked into, I suppose, IVF, so it's kind of like that preconception sort of working out, it's taking conception into someone else's hands. Did you feel that when you went into the process, and I understand that, this as a sample size, this is n equals 1, but in your experience, like, were you an avid participant in that whole thing, or do you think it could have been better for you as a man and part of the IVF process?
Yeah, I think it could definitely be better. I mean, I definitely wanted to be an active participant, and I went to all the appointments and everything like that. But you often just felt like a bit of an add-on. You'd be waiting in the waiting room, or maybe sitting next to your partner when they have the implantation, and so you're just sort of a bit of an add-on to the whole process. And also I found that I was sort of full of doubts about what I could do to do better as well. So there was times when you'd be worrying about how you were affecting the process. Like in my case, we had a number of different situations that was causing infertility, but one of them was I had a low sperm count, and you start doubting yourself and stuff like that, and you start doing things that probably, if you think back on it, probably we're not particularly rational in some ways. Like there was one time I rang one of my IVF specialists. We went through 2 programs, and the doctor was a really good guy. He was a well-known IVF specialist. I liked him a lot. But I asked him a question. I used to do a lot of running back then. I said, would running and wearing running tights affect my sperm quality? And I didn't have a clue, but I was starting to panic about, was that an issue? And he could tell he was a bit annoyed. He thought it was a irrelevant, a bit of a stupid question, and he said, "Oh God, I don't know," sort of thing. And while that's probably quite a fair enough reaction from him, it also made me feel a little bit stupid and start doubting myself a little bit more. So you're not completely sure what your role is in the whole process, and I think that could be handled a bit better by the medical professionals in there. Yeah.
So we've had a question on this. I was going to jump to Adam, but we've actually had a question on this in terms of someone's asked. So and it's aimed at Adam and Stathy, but I'd actually also be really interested in Jackie's opinion in terms of what sort of work there's been done around what would make men feel more welcome during their healthcare appointments with their healthcare providers during pregnancy, or during the attempts to become pregnant, if it's IVF. Has there been much work done in that area, Jackie?
Yeah, well, some of it is around the language that's used. So Stathy made the point that, he felt like the practitioner he's speaking to felt, don't bother me, you're wasting my time. But the very first thing to do is to validate the question and the need for the information. So, hopefully someone's going to say, great question, Staffi. That's one that's really commonly asked. A lot of men want to know the answer to that one. So firstly, you're made to feel like, this is a question that comes up a lot and you should feel justified in asking it. The second thing is that the research suggests that what men and, speaking as an N of one in women here, this is what I want for my practitioner as well. I want information and I want it clear and I don't want it dumbed down, but I also do want it, I don't want it in jargon. So it's a bit of an art and a skill that we're asking from our health practitioners to very clearly say to us, here's what the research or here's what we know about what you're going through. And this is what we've found. And this is the best evidence so far that I'm going to give you for the treatment that I'm going to suggest, and to engage men and fathers and prospective fathers in a partnership and talk around, so here are some of the options. The evidence looks good for both or better for one than the other. How do you feel about that? What do you think, would this work for you? So finding out firstly whether or not, once you've actually talked about some options moving forward, whether they're likely to be taken up, because it's no use actually saying, oh, Staffi, I think that what you should do now is run 3 times a week and eat these foods, and then you go home and not do any of that. So the next stage is to engage in that partnership. Are you going to do that? If not, well, let's work out something that's realistic for you going forward. So it's a discussion and it's respect in that discussion rather than a top-down hierarchical, again, thought that I'm the professional and you'll just do what I say and not bother me beyond that. So, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So that the language is critical, and it's really interesting that there's been some homework on that. So, Adam, would that have changed your journey in terms of if during the process, if that sort of language and that style had it been used? I mean, you're not saying that you had actually a bad experience during the whole thing, are you?
No, I'm not saying I had a bad experience. It's just I know that could have been a lot better in a lot of different ways. And one of the things I think it can really start with is for organisations, whether it's hospitals or other treatment services, do a thorough review of your training materials or your information packs or the information sessions that you're running with your mums and dads, whether that's hospitals and you're going in for your parenting classes or you're going in to see your midwife or you're going to an IVF clinic or whatever it might be, that you review all of your information that you're sharing and have a look at how much of it includes anything about fathers, how much of it actually includes pictures or things that, how inclusive is your material of fathers. And if it's very little or none, then I believe we've pretty clearly got a problem. And one of the hospitals that Dad's Group is working with at the moment is hospitals across southeast Queensland, and a lot of the work that's being done is helping them to review their parenting classes and their information that they're sharing to help them understand what they can do to improve on their material that will help fathers get a better understanding of their role and also understand what fatherhood and parenting is going to look like, particularly in the early stages of parenthood. And it completely makes sense to me. And so I think it would have been a lot more helpful if that was the case. Whereas going similar to what Staffi was saying before, I like to describe it as a trailer. So I felt like I was a trailer where I'm connected to my wife and my future child and William when he was born. I'm connected to them, but I was only there along for the ride. I wasn't necessarily engaged in that process.
Yeah. Yes, it's interesting that work that Dad's Group's doing in southeast Queensland is going to be quite interesting to see the outcomes of. And there's been some really good things in the last just few weeks even, in New South Wales Department of Health announcing the funding for SMS for Dads in partnership with Panda. So I think that's a great thing that's happening there, that we can get that finally out and running. So yeah, kudos to New South Wales Department of Health and Richard Fletcher and SMS for Dads and Panda for all getting together on that one.
I like to refer to Richard, sorry, Simon, I like to refer to, and it was the night where I met Jackie, actually, I named Dr. Richard Fletcher the Godfather of fatherhood. I just think he's, you know, he's been talking about this stuff that we're talking about since the late 80s or early 80s or something like that, and we're talking about it today like it's something new.
Yes.
So yeah, incredible figure.
It is. It's great. It's and also the work that you're talking about being done for the whole antenatal period, etc. We've sometimes had surgeries and things ask us, how do we make them more men inclusive? And it's interesting how many of them think putting a Wheels magazine in the waiting room pretty much has guys covered. And yeah, well, firstly, not every guy likes cars, but anyway. So with that, I suppose the other thing I'd just like to, and I like to always bring this up, it is actually in the Case for Change, and for people who haven't seen the Case for Change, it's on our website at Plus Paternal. But ours is not, this is very much not about beating up the health sector and about saying that health professionals need to you know, change the case, etc. It's actually about trying to add to the journey of which, and it rightly is focused on mothers and children, but it's about adding to that. It's about trying to improve that so fathers are included and there's an inclusive, and there's a better outcome for the whole lot that are involved in that process. So we've had a question here that just actually saying that actually in the edition of SMS for Dads, there's a Ready to Cope edition as well with it. So from the COPE organisation. So another question, I suppose and it really is around where, if you had, and last time I asked them, in the last session we had, I asked them if they had a magic wand, but the magic wand was only good for one thing. What would be the one thing that you'd actually change? And as fathers and people who wanting to go through the fatherhood process, okay, you're sitting there, you look back at what happened. If you could change something, what would it have been? Now you both got off and started looking really pensive on me. So I'm going to ask Jackie, what would be the one thing that she thinks might have the biggest impact? And I'm going to let you, Adam and Stathy, you keep thinking with your pensive looking faces on. And so Jackie, what do you think, just in the research you've seen and the readings that you've done, what would make that change?
Oh, yeah, big question. And I'm going to cheat because I'll say one thing, but it has levels. And I think that one thing is actually that initial thing that I mentioned before around language. If we can change our whole mindset so that the language becomes entirely inclusive, that it doesn't even occur to us to only speak to mother about the transition into parenthood or the preconception process and the preparation for parenthood. If we can just focus on the word family rather than mother, infant, maternal, infant, we start to set up an expectation that we are more inclusive. The next step beyond that, and that's a concern, and I think is the bigger challenge here, is actually what do we do then when fathers do need more support, and how do we build in those referral mechanisms? Because one of the things that keeps happening is there are a lot of people who say, oh, our service is really raring to go here. We are fully on board philosophically with this idea that family should be the way we think about this. We think about it as a system. We need services to support everyone. But when we set up something for dads, they don't seem to come. They don't turn up in the same numbers that mothers do. And look, even in research, we had to fight very hard to recruit fathers and men prospectively who are at the age ready to move into fatherhood into our study, it's tricky. So this is going to take a long time for fathers to feel like this is, and men to feel like this is a normal thing to engage, and for services to say this is a normal thing to provide support. I think the next thing beyond that language will be interesting to hear what Adam and Stathy say, because what would keep you there if you did, if you did turn up to one of these services? You know, why do you think people maybe think, oh, that'd be a good idea, they should exist, and then not go?
Yep.
So I'm handballing the next question, Simon.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And we're going to go with Adam first, because he's looking like he's raring to go.
Yeah, my brain was ticking away. It was pretty obvious. My poker face is terrible. So for me, I would change the preparation period during, particularly, and when I say preparation, I'm talking about during pregnancy, and because I think it would have helped, I suppose, decrease the stress or the anxiety or the shock, I suppose, decrease the shock of when certain things came up that I had no idea about. So, and then, you're trying to work out the things you have an idea about when you become a parent as a dad. But then when these curveballs are thrown at you that you've got no idea about, that are actually, you find out, are extremely common, I just think that, the preparation for parenting I would make a big change with that. And in terms of what Jackie was saying with, the male engagement, if I can cheat too and add one little extra layer of that, and that is having like a peer, like a father peer involved in that preparation, whether it's preparation for parenting classes or whatever, even if it's for a very short period of those classes, to engage in that, within that space, to then dads are hearing from another father and mums are hearing from another father, and there's that opportunity to kind of hear from them of what it can be like to leading up to being a dad. Yep.
And Stathy, what would have made a difference? What was the one thing that you would change?
It's a little bit of a difficult one. There's a couple of things, I suppose. From a personal perspective, I would like to have had more knowledge about what's made up IVF, and also what goes into pregnancy. As a bloke, I learnt a lot during the process, and I realised how little I knew when I first started. And I think if I had a better appreciation as to what goes into both IVF but also pregnancy, that probably would have helped as well. And just with the IVF, I know both my wife and I, we both went into the process, the first cycle, thinking, well, we haven't been able to get pregnant naturally, but we're going to IVF. Okay, we'll get pregnant within a cycle or two, and no problems at all. We didn't realise that. I think most people may not actually have a successful journey through IVF, or at least a large proportion don't have a successful journey. And when we first started, we didn't really realise that, and I don't know if that was ever discussed. I can't remember, or if it was discussed, it probably, at least with me, didn't sink in. So we were often continuing this cycle of thinking, oh, well, next one, and we just didn't realise that there's no guarantee that IVF will actually work. So I think maybe stressing that point a bit more and making sure people educate people, make sure they realise that sort of thing would help a lot. Yeah.
Can I just add something to that? Sorry.
Go, Jackie.
There's some research, not in the area of fatherhood, but in other men's health, where there's real variation around how much information people want. So some men are given a lot of information and come away saying, they just dumped all this information on me and now I feel completely overwhelmed. And others are saying, I really just needed that information to ease my anxiety, to know how to move forward. So I think one of the early questions is for practitioners to ask, what sort of person are you? I mean, what would you like more information? Because I've got a bed here for you. But, you know, some people, you might like to come in and we can go through it bit by bit, or would you like me just to lead this process, or would you like it all to think about, and then we can discuss your questions a bit later? Yeah.
It's a great point, Jackie. It's almost every health appointment should almost start with, how do you like your information? How much do you like? How do you like it provided to you? Okay, fine. We'll make sure that happens now, your appointment. So Adam, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, well, I'll just quickly acknowledge what Jackie was just saying, because that's 100% true. You know, we know that more often than not, dads want, I suppose, less chunky information and also information that they can relate to. But yeah, what I was going to add is I just reflected for a minute whilst Stathy was talking, and just remembered the parenting class that we went to, where I remember there was a period where the lady running it gave a bunch of us dads a couple of sheets of butcher's paper, and we were to write down what we think is going to be helpful, or I think it was, how do we plan on helping our partner, or something like that. I can't remember. I don't recall mums being asked to do the same thing, but that just came to me as well. But I think if we're talking about what could be more helpful, that's a perfect opportunity for, like I mentioned, a peer father to be involved in that part where he can be around the guys. I remember that experience. There was laughs. There was, we felt like a team. We didn't know each other from a bar of soap. But for 5 to 10 minutes, we were connecting and having a laugh and sharing and trying to work out with each other how we were going to be supportive and how we're going to help our partners. To have someone in there to talk through that and sort of guide people through it, and then help them to present whatever they came up with at the end there, that would be invaluable.
And I think, Adam, some of the research that we've looked at talks about the importance of the spontaneity of that. So dads have said that idea of going to a group where we all share our emotions together, that doesn't really appeal to a lot of people. But if you just have that opportunity, and it's a dad's group Inc. again does this quite nicely, doesn't it? Where it's just a chance to get together and share whatever comes up, whatever matters in the moment for you.
Yeah, that I say this all the time. There's this belief, and I understand where the belief comes from, that men don't talk or men don't like to talk. I find that can be quite rubbish a lot of the time, because you give men the right setting and the right environment, and something that, something that's comfortable and non-judgmental, and somewhere with other people that are like-minded, you can't shut them up, and the conversations run quite deep. It's not, there's a space where it's relatively surface stuff, which is great, and you talk about footy or whatever. But more often than not, once someone opens up that, something to do with mental health or something that they've been finding challenging at home, it just opens a massive can of worms.
Now I've got to quickly catch up on a couple of questions, and then we'll have to bring things to a close. But someone, and look, I'm going to read this out just because I really like the last thing they wrote in it, which was, and it was directed at Jackie, but it's, has there been any research, anything around if husbands have had much input into the decision on the obstetrician or fertility service that couples have? And the reason I quite like the question is because at the end of it, it says, maybe we need to have mid-husbands. So I think Adam's going to start up another group now for the mid-husbands. But I think it's probably a little bit too nuanced for there to be specific research. But has there been any sort of research in terms of, I don't know, the levels of engagement of fathers and if there changes output and outcome?
I have to say I'm not aware of any. I expect that we would have come across it if there had been.
Yep.
I know that there is research on things like parental decision making and certainly how that decision making is divided between a couple or shared within a couple, and really there's a lot of variation in that and how couples want to negotiate that. So it's tricky again because you don't want to overprescribe something that two couples or any couple will come together and make their own choices around. But yeah, it would be, I guess one of the things that could happen in the initial circumstances is just a discussion. Oh, how did you come to find me as your obstetrician? And let me tell you a little bit about how I work with you both. Just again, that broadening that connection around I'm here for the whole family, not just for one person in the family.
Yep. Yeah. So there's another question which is basically asking, basically how early should we start educating men on pregnancy and childbirth? I mean, what's the start date? I mean, I've got a thought on that, but I'll let you guys have a crack. Who wants to go? I'm going to dob in Adam because he's laughing the most, actually.
I hadn't really thought of that. That's a good question. I think for me, from the first appointment from when, that we've got coming up, and that is that even if we get a notification to say, yep, okay, so we're going to go, we've booked our appointment with the doctor, and they even request that I attend as well. And not every male or female or whatever can do that with work restraints or whatever. But I think as early as the first appointment would, in terms of the birthing or the pregnancy period.
Yep. Steffi?
I was actually going to say that I wish I knew more about this when I was a much younger person, because I went to a private single-sex boys' school, and when you heard anything about the reproductive system, you run away, covering your ears, la 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 la, sort of thing, and that'd be your reaction. And so I wish I understood what it took to be successful in pregnancy and reproductive and the whole reproductive system at a much younger age, and I reckon that would have helped me maybe with my thought processes in wanting to in starting my journey to become a father, or wish to become a father, sort of thing. So I'd say get the education about that as early as you can. But in terms of the formal process, I reckon if you can talk to the fathers and educate them from the very first appointment, or even beforehand, I think that's what should be done. And I agree with both Jackie and Adam. I think the men are willing to talk with each other, and I think talking among ourselves would really help with this process as well, because you realise, that guy might be able to help you, or that guy knows as little as what you do, and you help each other, sort of thing. So I think that's a really good process as well.
Yep.
Can I just quickly add that there's stuff that I've learned since I met you, Simon, where I'm now taking vitamins and things, because my wife and I are starting to talk about trying for a second, and I didn't know about that stuff. So I suppose Yeah, early on.
If I could just say that, in case our medical director's listening, said take any sort of vitamins, Rob.
There was no specifics. It was suggesting
I'm not getting a cutback or a fee, so just calm down.
There was something though, other than that you said that about how it's actually the 3 months leading up to when you're going to start trying, which is a really important period. Again, that's something that I didn't know. So
and you're right.
Here we are looking for number 2, and I'm 37, actually 31 now. I'm really 37 years of age, and I didn't know any of that type of thing.
And that's something that every bloke, look, I learned it when I came to this job actually. So every bloke I talk to, no one actually realises that if you want to start having children, today you start making the sperm that you'll produce in 3 months' time. And everyone goes, what? So Jackie, where do you think the best place to start educating men is?
Well, I'm entirely on board with what Staffy was saying, that I think that this is actually a life course education, and we can bring around intergenerational change. Obviously, it takes a while, but I think one of the earliest things that we can do is, if you're a dad already and you're going off to the doctor, take your first child with you. You know, it's part of the process of that child watching you engage in that whole process of preparing for the next baby, or, you know, it's a natural thing for dad to go to the doctor. So, you know, for son to go as well, potentially, but sons and daughters, to go along and witness that, through school, for it to be just generally regularly talked about how your health now will affect and may well affect your fertility into the future. How you look after yourself is important for yourself, not just now, but potentially into generations. We actually talk about multiple dividends over time, and what you put into your body even as a teenager may well be influential on the health and development of your offspring. It's very difficult for you to be thinking about that and to worry about long-term consequences. But I think Staffy made the point that at least you're sort of planting the seeds. Those things will come back to you at a point when you need them in the future. So you don't have to think, oh, why are we wasting our time educating people who are age 13, 14, 15, particularly around puberty? Why would we be educating them if it's not for such a long period of time? Well, actually, it's just about that process, building on the foundations. And, women do get this kind of education, thinking about yourself as a future person who will reproduce and have offspring into the future, and you functioning as an individual, but also as a parent of the future.
And look, I think it's a really strong point, Jackie, and that is that I think if the younger that we can educate boys about their sexual and reproductive health, you're right, it means that they know to go and talk to someone about their preconception health. They already know the seed's in there. So we're not having to try and get a young fella and say, hey, come on, you need to do this. And it's like, well, why? It's already there, the seed's there. So look, we have run over time, but no one's dropped off the webinar, so I thought it was worthwhile. And really, after our warm-up session the other day, where we went for half an hour without even trying, I knew today's was going to go well. Look, thank you, all three of you, so much for being so open, honest, and thoughtful in what you've said. Look, again, by the comments coming through, we could do this as a sort of, a weekly thing if we wanted to. But there's a couple of people's comments. There's one around some cultural change. There's another one around how do we get the funding to do things. I recommend to those people to actually come to our next session, which is about policy and structural change, because that's actually where those things will probably resonate more. And it's also a good plug for the next webinar. So thank you again to all the people who have been listening to us and watching us out there, and the people who have been pumping through the questions. Now, the case for change, as I said, is on our website, and it's there for you to have a look at. Look, there's been quite a number of organisations that have endorsed the case for change. We've got some 25, 26 organisations and a number of individuals. So if you think it's something at your organisation or you would like to do, please get in touch with us. Easiest thing to do is just go to the Healthy Male website, healthymale.org.au, and click on the Plus Paternal link. Now, as this session closes, there's going to be a brief survey open in your window. Now, I didn't lie about the first one that you had, the poll. It did only take your 2 clicks of your mouse and you're finished. So I'm not going to lie about this one either. This is quite quick as well. And it's really just to get what you think your key priorities are. It's your idea in terms of where change can happen. So we'd really love your feedback. Take those extra couple of seconds to do it, please. And I will let you get back to the rest of your day. Thank you so much for enduring another Zoom meeting. And once again, thank you to Adam, Stathy and Jackie for your time. It's been fabulous. Take care and stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.